I'm gonna pretend you dressed up for this show, by the way.
Okay, sure. Hey, go ahead, man. Yeah.
I also like.
I always wear a suit. I don't do interviews without suits.
Really?
Yeah, refuse to.
This is my liberal guests have to step it the fuck up.
Yeah, you guys do. At this point, it's very countercultural to wear a suit. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No.
That's
That totally makes sense. What's even worse is you can't see I'm actually wearing sweatpants. But I'm getting ready to go to the gym. I'm still like bettering myself.
Right. Yeah.
So hey, I'm so glad you're doing this show. I really wanted to. God, you guys have a crazy following. Like I just tweeted that I liked your show, and it has like 1,000 likes right now on Twitter, just because like you guys and like Glenn Greenwald liked it, and your guys they're fucking rabid, man.
They really are. Sometimes I meet them in the wild. I was at an event this weekend.
Yeah.
And the bartender was like, I fucking love your show. He's like pouring all the champagne. I was like,
whoa.
It was cool.
Isn't it weird? Sometimes like podcasts are a little weirder because you have a professional news show. Podcasts are weirder because when I get recognized, I forget how personal I am. So they'll be like, hey, how's Talib Kitty? And I'm like, how the fuck do you know my cat's name? And then I'm like, oh, it's my fault. I'm the one who.
Right.
What
awesome.
do you, I mean, I want to like just jump into Epstein so bad, but just me, I'm curious, just with your audience, where did you guys notice? It gives me hope, sort of, and I think it's going to give my listeners a lot of hope because we're told to be successful, you essentially have to pander to either side, right? Yeah. And it's a lot harder to, I'm sure you've gotten shit from conservatives. I'm sure Krystal's gotten shit from the left for doing a show together and essentially, finding common ground, but also disagreeing. Was it hard? Was there a part of you that ever thought going the partisan route would have been easier, or did you just kind of morally have the eye on the prize that you're like, you know what, there's going to be a fucking audience for this?
I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure, man. Like at the beginning, I just thought, look, I did the partisan thing. I worked at the Daily Caller. It's very boomer. Like I would just sick. Are we recording right now?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I was just very kind of sick of doing like the hardcore kind of, like anti, just like all anti-left all the time because it misses a lot of the nuance and it really just makes it so that it's not an interesting conversation. Yeah. It really silos you into not being able to have. And here's the thing, like I'm heterodox, right? Like I have a lot of agreement with a lot of people on the left about wealth inequality, about all these other things. Now, I'm not saying I agree with the solution on what to do with it.
Sure.
But so much of the current right-wing, the right-wing discourse is built around like whatever the left says, you completely say the opposite. Yes. And it's like, no, that's crazy. It doesn't make any sense. And it's actually really important if we share the same diagnosis of something, why I think the Krystal and Saagar show works is because we share the same diagnosis, which is anti-neoliberal, anti-establishment. And then we differ on the solution.
Yeah.
So we're both like, hey, wealth inequality is a problem. The rise of China is a problem. The deindustrialization of the country is a problem. Opioid crisis is a problem. Now, Krystal wants to like decriminalize all drugs. And I'm like, well, let's hold on a second. Or
they would take your suit away if you were for that. They'd be like, hand it over.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's that is what is I think the biggest difference. And in terms of the audience explosion, look, I mean, we got lucky. We got very lucky. Like it happened to come in the middle of a primary. A lot of what Krystal and I believe happened to also be the animating forces of the entire political discourse of the country. And then at the same time, the mainstream media is so bad.
I know.
Like they're just so bad. And here's the funny thing. They don't actually disagree. That's the truth of the show. Like, and that's why I think Krystal and I do agree, even though we disagree, which is we agree that things are fucked up.
Yeah.
Like, and they can't even admit that. Like everything is like a fake narrative. Like, like hardcore partisan people who are pro-Trump cannot admit that the economic structure of this country is bad. And then people on the left are like, no, like, oh, this is so bad, but like we have to go back to under Obama. And we're like, no. Like everything is bad. Everything for the last like 30 years is bad.
Yeah.
they can't understand that. So that's kind of where we are.
Yeah, it's hard, man, because like I think what you said about you and Krystal actually sums up the majority of people. Once I started talking to conservatives off air and just becoming friends with people and stuff like that, and I wasn't in this partisan bubble anymore, most of us think, I mean, dude, it was so bad on the left that when I started following conservatives and the El Paso shooting happened, and I saw conservatives tweeting like, man, we got to do something about these mass shootings, I was like, you guys care about that? That's an insane thing for me to think. I mean, fuck, gun owners probably care more because it represents them. They're gun owners, right? They're trained. They got guns because they want to protect their family, and they're like, oh, this lunatic is making us look bad. I like had this joke once where I'm like, that's like if a stoner sees like a white guy with dreadlocks, they're like, come on, man. Like, you're hurting all this whole cause. And so, but that's like, I felt like an idiot because literally whenever there's a mass shooting, liberals just acted like conservatives were celebrating in the street. And obviously with economics, it's like poor conservatives are hurt just as fucking bad, and obviously want a solution, obviously want to protect their family. And then when you start having the conversation, you realize that there's corrupt Democrats, there's corrupt Republicans, and that if the people actually banded together, whether we agree or disagree on all the solutions, maybe we could actually start holding these people accountable. Like when you were at the Daily Caller, did you also notice that you're sort of just forced to, and this is with the liberals too, blindly defend your guy? So not just principles, but you know, like every conservative's like, fuck, I guess I have to write something about Peter King today that's nice.
Yeah, so that's the thing. The thing is not that we did it. Like, we didn't blindly defend. We would go counter whatever, but then people would get mad, right? Like the administration or like people who would expect us to toe the party line, they get mad. And I was just like, I'm sick of dealing with these like hardcore partisans. I mean, that's really how it felt, which is I was like, you know, because look, the Caller, to their credit, they do critical journalism on the Trump administration all the time.
I have friends that write for them, and yeah,
and that's the thing. And nobody's ever going to give them credit for that, so I want to make sure I plug that. But it's like their most ardent readership, the most ardent readership of any partisan news organization or of a lot of this current like I call it like boomer political discourse. There's no nuance to be had, right? Like they get so dug in, and to me, the whole thing that I try and focus on with Krystal is one layer above the news. So it's basically like the news is like the literal thing, what's happening today.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why are things this way? Because the economy is bad, because of our trade policy, because of like long-standing policy choices that we made as a country over the last 45, 50, 60, 70 years that are coming up to root with us. We had a guy on our show called Matt Stoller who made this great point, which is the reason that nobody really understands what's happening right now is our politics are basically it's basically a revamp of 1920s or the 1910s.
Jesus.
Like we don't have any like current frameworks for how to deal with like monopoly power and what it means. Like, and here's the thing, we did great, amazing things in this country. We have a huge legacy we can draw on, but we all just forgot. Yeah. Like everybody just forgot about it.
Well, and those solutions, when you start talking about the system being broken, this is why you see people like Trump win. Because if you and you, by the way, you have to show empathy, and Krystal and I talked about it, where when the left just says anyone who voted for Trump is a Nazi without any empathy, we're making ourselves just look like trash people. But two, it's anti-intellectual, and if you can recognize that one of the reasons Trump won in districts that Obama won is because when the real solutions are hard, you tell someone who just lost his job and has 5 kids, what we really need to focus on is like campaign finance reform.
Right. Yeah, right.
He's checked out. But when the other guy goes, hey, that Mexican took your job, then they go, well, fucking, okay. Like, it sounds easier.
Well, here's the thing too. So this is what drives me crazy, right? As somebody who does believe in immigration restriction, I follow this stuff very closely, which is if you tag everybody who believes in immigration restriction a Nazi, you actually make it more difficult for the people who have good faith economic arguments about maybe why we should restrict immigration to distance themselves from actual Nazis.
Yes.
Because That's the real thing, is like, we are out here being like, screw these Nazis. We want nothing to do with these people. But that just because if you fuse it and you basically attack us all as one group, here's the other thing. People are going to say, okay, well, maybe I'm a Nazi. Like, they're going to say, if you tag somebody, you say over and over again, if you believe this, you're a Nazi. If you believe you want less immigration in this country, you're a Nazi. Then they're going to start listening to the only fringe voices on the right who can rightfully speak to economic frustration in this country, and you are going to radicalize an entire generation. This is what 4chan and a lot of this nihilism is all about.
I'm so glad you said. I've talked about this for so long, in not even with economics, but in different. Well, first of all, now I'm thinking the people who are really got to be upset are the actual Nazis who are like, I'm doing all this work for nothing.
They hate me, yeah, they hate me, right? They hate us because they're like, oh, he's stealing our shit.
Yeah,
and it's like, yeah, that's good. Like, I want you to get out. I want you people to be like unacceptable in society.
Yeah, it's like, the same thing happens with the left. I've been talking about it with two examples. One I've given on the show before, but it's so pertinent. When the El Paso shooting happened, my friend who works for The Blaze, like very conservative, he retweeted, we have to do something. Too many innocent people are dying. He mentioned gun regulation, and he's a proud Second Amendment gun owner. And he used the words white supremacy, which, like, I didn't even think the right ever used. And I was like, holy shit, this is awesome. So I retweet it. And I go, hey, here's my conservative homie. He wants solutions. I'm liberal. I want solutions. What do we do? And, dude, all the conservatives who responded were like, too many kids have died. We got to do something. This is terrible. Mental health in this country has to be fixed, blah, blah, blah. All of, like, my liberal followers who wrote were just like, then why does he fucking work for The Blaze? Like, maybe he shouldn't have worked for Trump. And that goes to, you think that guy's going to want to publicly tweet about gun control again? And the other example I had was, I talk about this with masculinity, where when you demonize masculinity on the left and you don't have masculine role models. I mean, shit, when I started doing jiu-jitsu 10 years ago, I was 28, and it was like the first time that I had a strong male role model being like, get up, be tough. And I wasn't like, tough is a social norm that, I was like, yeah, I got to be fucking tough. It doesn't mean I shouldn't be vulnerable. Doesn't mean I shouldn't cry. Doesn't mean all of those things, but also that there can be a positive to masculinity. There can be a positive to, making yourself strong so you can defend other people, so you can, whatever. And so what happens is, I think that's why Jordan Peterson blew up. I think that's why so many of these guys are blowing up among young men. And look, I don't have as many problems with Jordan Peterson as a lot of people on the left do, but my YouTube, hey, if you like Jordan Peterson, you'll love this, isn't pretty. And so if the left is demonizing men, and literally men go to Jordan Peterson because finally a guy's saying, make your fucking bed. And I watched him when I was in my 30s, and I was like, I got to make my bed. Now they're being drawn more to the right and definitely far away from the left, just because the left just makes them feel like fucking assholes.
Yeah, you're exactly right, man. And what you're getting to that point is about good faith, which is that you have to approach people in good faith on both sides, right? Yeah. So it's like you said on gun control. I see these things and I'm like, this is horrible. And yet this is what I mean. We share the diagnosis of the problem, but we disagree on the solution. My response was, we need to use the powers of the FBI to infiltrate and destroy these white supremacist organizations, right? Like, but this is not really something that some people on the left would want to do, because they're like, no, the solution is gun control. And I'm like, actually, there's only there's not that many people in this country who are actually like fringe, violent white nationalists. We did this with ISIS. I used to cover ISIS and write about the Pentagon, which is, we threw hundreds of millions of dollars and hundreds of FBI agents who were on chat rooms all day long talking to these guys, basically get them to the airport, to a point where they were about to fly to the Middle East and go and fight for Syria. You slap them. Material support for terrorism, 30 years in a federal penitentiary.
Whoa.
We should be doing that. If you are somebody who holds these beliefs, we should sick the FBI after you, and we can throw every single one of these people in federal prison. Now, look, that's a strong state solution that requires, belief in criminal justice and all that, and it doesn't have anything to do with guns. But because I actually support gun rights, I'm saying I want the government to do something about that. And by the way, this is the same thing. I am accepting that white supremacy is a mortal threat to so many people in this country. I just don't think that taking people's guns away is the way to do it.
Well, but
right?
that solution's so interesting, because when I heard that solution, you saw it as this is going to piss off the left because of, the criminal justice aspect of it. I saw it as, that's going to piss off the right, because every time that I would tweet about white supremacy, you'll get at least 5 like, what, you say that about Muslims? And it's just like, well, I would if they were the ones shooting up schools, like 100%. And I'll talk about radical Islam 100%. And that is where those bad faith arguments, which, are mainly on social media, that's where they occurred. That is such a fucking interesting solution, because I've never heard, I haven't heard that as a solution, especially in the gun control, the gun control department.
Right, and that's the thing is on this. These people are out there. They're out on 4chan. They're doing all these things. We did this we destroyed ISIS in this country. We literally got so many people who would have flown to Syria or would have gone to fight for Al Qaeda, or who would have been motivated for a domestic attack here, because we threw a lot of money and manpower, and we had the right laws. So what does that mean? We need to pass new laws, which means that if you support these organizations, fund these organizations, try to do something for it, you're going to get hit with a material support for terrorism charge, and you're going to go to jail for a long fucking time. So that's what needs to happen.
So tell me about this when it comes to extremism, with radical Islam, because where I come from, on the left, we would just hear the stories about, there were crazy stories, right? There were stories about, innocent mosques being infiltrated. There was one, man, this is probably like 10 years ago, where there was the undercover FBI agent was acting so shady and was so trying to
they called the FBI.
Yes, they called the FBI on him. They're like, yo, this crazy motherfucker's like trying to get us to be violent. So we hear those stories, and I think there's a middle ground. I talked about this on Rogan, and talked about this with Greenwald, where what you don't want to do is you don't want to wrap up so many innocent people, whether it comes profiling, torture, whatever, that is going to help radicalize people, that is going to help recruit terrorists, is going to turn moderates into extremists, like you were talking about with the Nazis, right? It's going to attract them to the extremists. However, now that I talk to people like you, and I'm showing my girlfriend 24 for the first time, I also want to hear the other side, which is talk about, you were just talking about some of the successes, but within that, I never heard that. I never heard that we pretty much wiped out ISIS that way. Were there civil rights violations? Did innocent people get swept up? And then how do you balance this?
It's a difficult conversation, which is, if you want to be on, I read the indictments of these things. These FBI agents go on these guys, they find them, and they're like, hey, you should go to Syria. And the guy's like, okay. And so then he buys a ticket to Syria and shows up at the airport. And now he's got a 30-year sentence for material support. So look, but here's the thing.
Kind of like 4chan, like a lot of times I remember reading stories where they would prey on these sort of sad virgin, kind of spending all day on the internet. And it's like, yeah, man, if anybody goes and gives that person purpose, Yeah,
but the FBI's argument is, if I could do it, then a real ISIS supporter could do it. And then guess what? Nobody made you buy that ticket. You spent the money on the ticket, or you showed up at the gun store. You went to the thing and bought a bowl full of nails and said, I'm going to blow these up in a police station.
What do you think the middle ground is? Because, when I see that, I wonder if, would terrorists have even found this kid? Was the FBI wasting resources when they could have gone after someone who was actually planning on carrying out an attack? But at the same time, what you said, it's like, well, fuck, man, if this strategy shut ISIS down, how do you sort of figure out, what were the successful examples?
Right? The successful examples are, there's a whole host. We got all these guys who were trying to go to fight for Syria. We got one guy who was planning an entire attack to blow up a police station. There are literally hundreds of these cases.
Yeah.
People, Somalians who wanted to go and fight for Al-Shabaab. A lot of these are, a lot of them have a willingness to kill Americans here at home or abroad. And so, look, it's a societal thing that we all agreed upon, that we were like, okay, Pulse nightclub is not acceptable in our society, or San Bernardino is not acceptable in our society. And I'm willing as an intellectually consistent person to make the same argument about El Paso, which is we are not condemned to white supremacist violence. We can declare war on white supremacist violence right here at home. And they should have the full resources of the federal government to infiltrate and destroy these organizations. I have no problem saying that, because anybody who declares war upon our government, who has the willingness to kill American citizens like this en masse, you bring this upon yourself.
Yeah.
And so I come at very much from an intellectually, like I said, like I don't, like I hate radical Islam and I hate white supremacist violence just as much. I want them to be treated the same. And conservatives who say the opposite and who have one standard, and not the other, and not on the other, are not being honest.
Right.
And that's why I'm willing to call them out.
I love the idea of white people who were like pro like spying on mosques being like suddenly like, what the fuck can the government do? Like,
yeah, no, it's true. Guess what? We look, like I said, we made a decision. We were like, this is wrong in our society. We're not allowing this to happen. So we have to say the same thing when, 20, 30 people are getting gunned down. I mean, the FBI just disrupted a plot. I think it was this week about against the synagogue. That's great news. We should have much, much more of that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of really good work. I think they've now begun to wake up, and I am hoping that some more legislation is passed through to give them even more authority to go after these groups.
And again, this comes down to if liberals and Republicans like you and Krystal do, like I'm trying to do on the show, talk to each other and found out you had the same goal, but we're so divided. Like, when it comes to national security, a lot of my anti-war points of view or anti-torture aren't just because I'm like, let's just like smoke weed with them and go to a fish show. It's because it's like, well, what puts us in more danger if we're bombing the wrong countries, if torture is being shown to like not provide us with the best intelligence, right? And there's evidence shown that like starting relationships with people are. And again, that is a conversation. Like when you told me that stuff about ISIS, old me would have been like, I have to gear up all of my civil liberties talking points. But now I'm like, no, fuck. Of course we want the same thing. I want to hear from you about that because you know more about that than I do. When it comes to the white supremacy thing, why do you think that more conservatives aren't aligned with you? And does that come back to just that basic dumb fucking Twitter tribalism where it's like my side's the one that says go after Muslims and their side is the side that demonizes all white people?
Yeah, if I could guess, I would say that people would agree with me in private. But here's the thing. There's no good faith in the media. And I say this over, like, if you come out and here's the thing. It would be so easy for me to make a living being like, brown conservative calls out Trump, or you know what I mean? Or like brown conservative stands with Trump. Like, this is the easiest way to make money.
Ex-male feminist.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
shutting those whores up for,
Yeah, right. You and I could go sign a deal and make a lot of money on both sides of these things. Like I could be on CNN tomorrow, or I could be like on Glenn Beck, selling books in a Barnes and Noble in the middle of the country.
By the way, I'm DMing you as you speak about tour names for when we make our millions.
Yeah, right. Yes, we could make so much money doing this. I mean, what I'm saying is that when you step out, and on the right in particular, you're willing to criticize your own. That gets picked up by the media so quickly as like, and they try to frame it. They're like, so and so breaks from Trump. So and so breaks from party, and then it makes you very politically vulnerable because you're trying to operate this in good faith. People who want in bad faith are trying to destroy the reasonable people, right? Like they're literally trying to destroy you, because what they'll say is they'll be like, well, how can you stand with President Trump on whatever? And it's like, no, like, look, we might have a disagreement on this. And then it just gets spun into a whole thing where you're 100% loyal or you're 100% not. And nuance is lost from the discussion. And that's what makes it so difficult. Think about it. I mean, the pressures and the incentives are such that if you do speak out, you're guaranteed a bunch of airtime on CNN and in the mainstream media. But these aren't people that you agree with. They're not giving you a lift and earn media because out of the goodness of their hearts. They have an agenda.
Right.
Their agenda is to show cleavages in the Republican Party. All they want is to destroy and to create chaos. Whereas people like me, I think people like Krystal, people like you are all about fusing together. I mean, look, that's ultimately what this whole cross-cultural, like cross-party, long form discussion is about is that 3 minutes on CNN is not going to solve a goddamn thing.
No.
It just won't. You can't.
No.
It's impossible.
And I even had to stop writing, and I'm more selective now. You know, I love going on conservative shows because I don't try to be a conservative. I still make sure I say my liberal views and, you know, et cetera. But there have been some shows that I've had to say no to. And there have been even publications and places that I wrote for that kind of started as this anti-cancel culture, showing both sides, slowly morphing into being a different version of that, just kind of from more of a center ground or more of a right, where like taking glee in canceling people on the left, right? And
Sure.
and it's
so stupid.
It's so dumb. And you know, where I really admire you and Krystal, and I'm so glad we linked up because I mean, honestly, like I'd followed Krystal a while, but I hadn't checked out the show. And then one day I was like, I should try to get her on my podcast. But like for a while, man, I really felt like a man without a country. And it's fucking hard. Like, I don't know if you've experienced this on a personal level or just professional, but even personally, and it's so insulting when people who are willing to talk to the other side are called grifters now is the big thing, where personally, it's fucking hard, man. When you feel like you don't have a tribe, or, you know, when I see someone from the left come in and say something horrible about me, and I don't necessarily have people from the right who are going to defend me, you know, like you feel kind of alone.
I know exactly where you're at. I know exactly where you're at, man, which is like people accuse me of being like a Elizabeth Warren or Bernie shill. And I'm like, listen, I don't agree with most of their solutions. But guess what? I agree with their diagnosis of the problem.
Yes.
And so I see my role as promoting anybody, including Donald Trump, including Josh Hawley, including Tom Cotton, a lot of these other new right politicians who are putting forth a vision of our economic structure itself does not work for the benefit of the majority of Americans. That is my politics. That's my politics. I'm all about a cross section, making sure that all people of all races, all colors, all creeds can actually make a living in this country. That is all I care about. So sure, if there are people on the left who are talking about that, I'm going to approach them in a good faith manner. I have Bernie people on my show all the time. I don't come at them and scream about how they're socialists. We'll debate about whether having more union representation on corporate boards is the right thing or not. Wealth tax, whether that really would, you know, fund some of the things that we want to go after. Medicare for all. My whole thing is, I'm like, instead of me, there's so many people on the right who are like, oh, the American healthcare system is fine. I'm like, no. These are a disaster. However, does that mean Medicare for all is the exact thing? I like to talk about hospital consolidation, breaking up, using these hospital monopolies and price fixers, which could lower the overall cost. We could go after the insurance giants. We could go after, there's so many different things we can talk about, right? Like, and I'm so willing to have this conversation. But once again, I'm not a traitor to the right because I approach these people in good faith. In my view, they are the traitors to the right because they betrayed their voters for 40 years until Trump came along with the most simplistic messages on earth and actually got them to vote for them for the very first time.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'll say this where it's like Trump won because when he talked about draining the swamp, he was right. When he talked about fake news, he was right. Now, was he part of all of that? Is it fake news on the left and on the right? 100%. But like you said, his diagnosis was correct. What do you think it is about the right where, because again, especially in poor parts of the South and the Midwest, you know, the right is suffering just as much, right? Working class people in general across all political spectrums. It's so funny. Krystal started coughing when I interviewed her.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she did.
This is the karma.
And now you are.
But
good,
it's because we're so outraged for justice. Right. What is stopping the right? Is it just because they disagree so vehemently with the left solutions? But what is stopping the right from, just like you, being like, look, I'm not for these socialized solutions, but like, fuck yes, these corporations are taking advantage of people, or, we give more to the upper 1% than we do to the majority of Americans. I feel like that would be a great platform. And I think the left assumes, and you'll disagree with this, but the left assumes it's because if you are conservative, your policies will always benefit the rich, will always benefit the upper class, will always fuck over the poor. Therefore, it is not in your best interest to even bring this up. You kind of just want to be like, everyone's fine. Look at Donald Trump. What a success he is. We can all just be like him. What do you think the actual reason is?
The reason is money and ideology. So here's the thing. And money follows the ideology. Basically, Ronald Reagan Revolution, 1980s. I think it was probably necessary at the time, but a lot of these ideas ossified into the conservative movement and have not updated their thinking since 1980. Ugh. We're a very different country. We have a very different economy. We went to 2 disastrous wars abroad.
Yeah.
There is an entire machine in Washington, and then New York, which is funded by Wall Street and big moneyed interests to push libertarian ideology amongst the professional right, to make you reflexively go, well, no, income inequality is actually just a natural byproduct of a free market system.
Right.
Or to make you think, oh, well, all taxes are bad. All taxes whatsoever are bad. And here's the funniest part. It is so out of step with actual voters. The blue collar, white working class voters who put Republicans in the White House, put them there for cultural reasons. However, the right has deluded itself into thinking that they put themselves there for economic reasons.
This is fascinating.
So they got it completely wrong. They thought that people were voting for them in order to stand up for free market libertarian ideology. The truth is they always hated the free market libertarian ideology, but they agree with them on the cultural issues. So my big criticism of the left is you get the economic stuff right, but you get the cultural stuff wrong. And I think both parties are totally out of whack. So for me, what I look at on the right, which is there's no current economic or educational incentive, right? So as a person who's on the right, you come to DC, you're just, you're dispositionally, culturally right. You don't really know why. You're like, oh, this cancel stuff is kind of crazy. Like, I don't know, my parents, are traditional Christians and, I feel like we're demonized by the media. That's probably true.
Yeah.
And so but you don't really know what you believe on a lot of these economic matters. You come up here, there's whole programs, fellowships, infrastructure put into place to be like, you're conservative, which means you believe in lower taxes and less government. And you go, okay, all right. And you kind of don't really think about it very hard. But that's very out of step with everybody else. So the reason why more people aren't necessarily thinking like me is you kind of have to be a contrarian asshole. Like,
right.
I don't know about that. And you go online and you start reading, you're like, some of these leftists have a point, but like, I don't know about this.
Yeah.
And then you start reading like blogs and you're like different books. I'll recommend, some people, very fringe people, not fringe in the bad sense, but like we're just shut out really by the mainstream media. It's a movement that I was kind of part of 2015 and beyond called the Reformicons. It was really much called like trying to realign the Republican Party with his working class voters. And so Reihan Salam and Ross Douthat, they're both very famous guys now. But at the time, and they wrote this book in 2008, a brand new party, right? And it was all about this Sam's Club working Republican, understanding that a little bit more economically left combined with the cultural right is around like 75% of the country.
Right.
And like that is the greatest working class winning coalition that you could ever have. And that's what Trump tapped into, right? Like that's how he won. And here's the thing. If you take away look, a lot of people hate Donald Trump and like, look, I don't want to get into that, but like the whole thing is like, if you strip away some of that stuff, if you look at the ideology and the polling alone, that's how he's going to win. That's why Bernie Sanders does so well.
Right.
It's because Bernie, even though he's very culturally left, never talks about it, ever.
Yeah.
His whole thing is economic left. He's like economics. And Trump very much did the same thing. Trump is our first pro-gay marriage president ever in history. We don't ever talk about that.
Holy shit, I never thought about that.
Yeah, nobody's ever talked about that. And yet, so Donald Trump was just like, yeah, I'm fine with that. He's like, but all I care about is immigration and trade. And immigration is a cultural issue, but it's also an economic one. It is the biggest cross-cultural issue. It's the number one issue for Republican voters. And he just spoke to their very bottom line concerns. And it's just, so much of this is so misunderstood. And this is what I mean whenever I say that the elite right and the elite left agree. They agree with the current structure of the system.
Yeah.
They, like the neoliberal left, basically loves, they're all about globalism and transnational borders. So they have no problem with jobs being exported to China. And then the elite neoliberal right is fine with jobs being exported to China because that's very cheap. It's good for multinational corporation bottom lines. But meanwhile, the American people get screwed. And so
Right.
people are only just now starting. This is when people ask me when I think of Trump, that's what I always say. His greatest gift to us all will be the breaking of ideology, which is for the rest of us to say, you know what? I don't believe you. And neither does the country anymore.
Right.
That was his greatest gift to us.
It's a great point, man. I think about this a lot when it comes to economics. I'm so curious, sort of your solutions, because what I always thought was, probably much like you, that neoliberalism was a huge part of the problem. But then my takeaway was, well, the reason that the economy is in the shit is because we've never actually had recently an actual like lefty economic policy. So like Obamacare is this great example where I wanted Medicare for all over Obamacare, and then a lot of these neoliberals stepped in, watered down Obamacare, and Obama also, didn't really start with like a high bar. And now everything that conservatives say that they have a problem with Obamacare, they're right, because I have that problem. Suddenly I was paying like $900 a month.
Yeah, I know.
And the idea of like charging people who couldn't afford health insurance seemed like completely counterproductive. But there were some fucking evil things happening, like the pre-existing conditions, kids not being able to stay on their parents' health insurance, that I was like, all right, I guess I'm taking it for the team. But in my head, if suddenly everybody, including these poor conservatives, suddenly had free health care, then they would just like magically, become Democrats. Not taking into account what I think Republicans are scared of, which is they don't trust the government. Why would they want the government with their health care? So where I agree, where I've come around and become a little more conservative, maybe not policy-wise, but conceptually, is that I'm not part of the left just being like, fuck the rich, right? Like, I will never forget, there was an article, and I think Jacobin, that was like Amy Goodman. You know Amy Goodman, the host of Democracy Now?
Yeah.
It was all about like Amy Goodman makes too much money. And that's where I'm like, we've gone insane. Like, Amy Goodman is as fucking left as you can.
Yeah.
On her free time, she's like baking bread and like being attacked by rebels overseas. And I was like, I want Amy Goodman to be a billionaire. I want her to retire on a fucking beach somewhere. She's just like, I don't think she ever sleeps. Anyway, so I think that I want people to make money. I don't see people wanting to make money, wanting to take care of their family as a bad thing. I've started to come around and see how sometimes handouts can hurt people, but I also see that the people talking about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps are often rich white politicians who were born into wealth, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to solutions and what to do, I mean, I know what's happening now isn't working, but as someone who sees the actual economic problem from the right, what is the right-wing solution? Because whenever we had conservatives, I mean, look, you even have Greenspan who said he was wrong about trickle-down economics, and giving more money to the wealthy so that they can create jobs is flawed. And I think most people just assume that is lower taxes, give more money to the rich, that will fix, and it's not.
No, the solution is a correct trade policy, a trade policy which actually interacts with the world to the benefit of the American worker and of American industry. This is something that conservatives for a long time because they just hated Obama. They're like, oh, blah. And actually, Romney and a lot of these people were saying the right thing back in 2012, which is that the new types of jobs created after the financial crisis are not the types of jobs under which you can support your family. They're not the types of jobs which have pensions, which have benefits, which provide all of these positive externalities for communities, for family consolidation, for building a town in which, look, the whole purpose of the American dream is to be able to create a life for yourself and provide for your loved ones, usually in the place where you are. It drives me crazy when you have these conservatives who are like, well, these people can just move. I'm like, migration is not a good thing in and of itself. Like, you don't move because you're happy or because because you're like, oh, I love moving. You're like, you're basically fleeing something else. Like, your job as a policymaker is in order to create the conditions in your local community as good as possible for you to provide for your family and have as many kids as you possibly want. And so that's my thing. So like all my economic policies, what I would say is, like handouts, et cetera, or the creation of these government programs, corporate tax rate, whatever. All my stuff is instead of the corporate tax rate and allowing for these stock buybacks is the reorientation of this $1.5 trillion of that we basically had to play with and funneling it towards things like family leave and like using your some of your money, your child tax credit, right? Like more money for the amount of children you have in order to boost our domestic fertility rates, using our trade policy to produce using our trade policy to bring more manufacturing jobs, using our defense. Here's the thing. The Pentagon, it has a massive budget, which I know that the left likes to talk about all the time.
Yeah.
We can reorient the way that budget is used in order to build great things in this country again. Here's how I look at it. I'm a producerist, not a consumerist. So this is my big break from neoliberalism, and this is the thing. Most Americans understand this. They don't like think about it in philosophical terms like I do. They're just like, we used to build great things in this country and we don't anymore.
Right.
And they're right. Like that. All national policy should be focused. Like, what is a great nation? Is a great nation one that has cheaper shit at China? No. A great nation which goes to the moon and creates amazing things, has like a world-class infrastructure program where your quality of life is amazing, where as a dad or a mom you can make enough money to have 3 kids and one of your spouse stay at home and not worry that all of those kids are going to get $100,000 in student debt if they want to have upward mobility. That's another thing we don't talk about. That drives me crazy, which is like our entire new generation has been denied the ability to accumulate intergenerational wealth. We are creating the conditions for a class revolution, because that's what happens, which is if you let the 5 to 10% be the landlord class that rents to the 90% of the 90% of the country, you don't live in America anymore.
Right.
Like this country was all about personal ownership and property, and these values were imbued in us all the way back to the Homestead Act. And now we're basically getting back to like a debtor nation.
Yeah.
And all this is what I'm talking about, which is my policy is all around the American family, where it is, and just rejecting the cultural norms of the cosmopolitan elites on the coast.
Yeah,
that's what it's all about.
I mean, that sounds fucking great. It sounds like you want the people who got us in this situation held as responsible as Lefty McChomsky does.
Yes.
Right. What is your solution for people who are really struggling and who don't have anything? Because the more I've started to read more conservative articles, the more I'm kind of like, well, fuck, man, if there are studies that say that welfare hurts or that say that, all this stuff hurts, well, that's not good. But also there are people who are legitimately stuck and have nothing to do, or if they don't get some kind of check, their kids are going to starve. So do you have a solution for, the people who are completely stuck? Is there a way, have there been studies done that show you can there's a way to wean people off, or should we be focusing more on programs that train people for jobs?
That's the thing. It's so multifaceted, Jamie, which is where does it all begin, right? Which is that this is the difference. This is, again, I agree with the problem, which is that it's unacceptable that our prime male age working population is not working. Like I just read this story in the New York Times in which they celebrated the fact that more women are now in the workforce, and yet if you read the article, it's all about how these poor guys in coal mines who worked there for generations are now staying at home and are hooked on opioids while their wives work $10 minimum wage jobs at a hospital. And I'm like, is that fucking progress?
Feminism.
That's a disaster.
Yeah, there are
That is
always
a
those
complete disaster.
There are always those like tweets around the holidays from like the local news where it's like, this brave woman worked 65 jobs so she could buy her kid a used high chair.
And I'm like, that's not something to celebrate.
Right.
Like, this is an economic disaster on our country. So this is again where I differ with on the left, which is they, Bernie and Krystal are very much like UBI, federal jobs guarantee. I don't agree with that. I am much more on using government policy to either compel or incentivize industry to boost employment prospects, to provide jobs that have the sustainable ability to make you be able to support your family where you are based. So, and this is my disagreement with the right so much. The right is always like, you can't tell corporations what we do. Corporations are a legal structure. The U.S. government and the state writes the law. All business is a product of government policy, whether they like it or not. They all benefit from the social order that we have created. We can tell anybody what to do. The real question is about how we tell them and what we tell them. But this is, again, what I'm getting at about the ideology about here in D.C., which is people on the right are so wedded to the current system that they're like, it is heresy that you could tell a company where to produce something or not. And I'm like, excuse me? No, it's not. It's not heresy whatsoever. It's about balance.
So are you saying that there needs to be regulation? Because, like, again, what you're saying sounds much better than, like, quote unquote handouts in theory, because you want to give people a sustainable way to live and support their family. But then we get into what I was saying before, when even Greenspan was like, trickle down doesn't work, where it's like, okay, cool. So if we're spending all of our money instead of giving it to the lower class to incentivize businesses and corporations, what holds them accountable from using that money instead of paying like all their CEOs these fucking like gigantic golden parachutes after they like destroy our economic infrastructure?
That's why you don't give cash payments to corporations. You create tax incentives and other legal structures to make, and then, or, the government can commission the creation of, like when we went to the moon, these things were built in Tennessee, in Huntsville, Alabama. There were hundreds of thousands of jobs. All of these created around a single national program. I mean, national defense, for example, on steel, right? Like, why do we get all of our national steel from China? This was something that was just accepted in America, right? Like before Trump, everyone was just like, oh, no, it's cool that our single most important national defense priority is created in China. They're like, oh, there's just absolute. And these libertarians will tell you with a straight face, oh, yeah, it's fine. And I'm like, well, wait a second here. So if we only have one smelter, which is capable of creating the steel that we use to create a destroyer, and the only other one is in Australia and owned by a Chinese company, and we go to war with China, you don't think that's a problem? And they're like, well, the free market solves all. And I'm like, no, you're out of your mind. You're out of your mind, which is, you have to have a country which is capable of, like that. Like I said, what I said about being a great nation. A great nation can grow its own food. A great nation can produce its own energy. A great nation and a superpower, a true superpower, can build its own infrastructure. Now, look, global trade and all that, that's all great. But like, what country allows its business industry to create supply chains in China, like in their enemy's territory, to the point where they are now so beholden to them that they are more interested in perpetuating the Chinese communist system than they are the U.S. government?
Oh,
you should be very afraid of that.
Yeah, it was like Saudi Arabia with oil. Like we're gonna bomb Iraq when the axis of evil just like didn't mention the place that the majority of hijackers went to, and it's like, well, we gotta. Okay, so let's end with this because it ties into the media, and it also ties into the entire conversation we've had, where you can have a liberal that's like socialism and a conservative that's like free market, pro-life, pro-choice, but you get all of those people in a room, and all of them are like, yo, fucking Jeffrey Epstein was murdered, son. Like, there is like no.
That is true. The great uniter.
No denying that. So I mean, obviously, when Epstein was arrested, when the suicide, whatever. I covered that on the show. What I was saving for you, and I don't know if this is when we were DMing and you were like, I want to talk about Epstein. I don't know if this is what you were referring to. I forget if it happened yet, but I want to talk about the ABC CBS scandal.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk to you about, man, which is that more than anything just reveals how the media is an ally of the powerful.
Okay, so explain what happened. Explain what happened first, because I haven't even talked about it yet.
Okay, so basically, Amy Robach, she's a Good Morning America ABC News anchor, was caught on a hot mic. She was broadcasting to the control room where she was talking about, and look, I do this, everybody's just like, you're like bullshitting around, whenever the camera's off, or whenever the cameras are on, but you're not like broadcasting live. And she was talking about how she had interviewed a Jeffrey Epstein accuser 3 years prior and had all of the facts and the photos of Prince Andrew, a member of the British royal family, with his arms wrapped around the 17-year-old girl, the whole Bill Clinton flying on Jeffrey Epstein's thing, all of these interviews. She had things on camera corroborating evidence, everything. She had the whole shebang back in 2015. Okay. And she says ABC killed it because the palace got involved and they wanted an interview with Will and Kate because the royal wedding was happening.
So
that
gross.
Is how fucking corrupt it gets, man. And that's the thing. And it's just, listen, I track the Weinstein thing very closely because it's the same thing.
Yeah.
You could have they were reading from the same script. Amy talks about on the hot mic how the ABC execs were like, nobody knows who this guy is, blah, blah. They're like, oh, and that's exactly what they said about Weinstein.
Right.
About Harvey Weinstein, one of the most powerful people in Hollywood. They're like, oh, nobody even knows who he is. Like, is the audience even going to care? This is a stupid story. And look, I mean, I'm going to show my right-wing hat here a little bit, but these are the people who had no problem airing the most baseless accusations against Brett Kavanaugh back in 2017, and this didn't fit their editorial standards. I put this up on my show. A photo of a prince of the British royal family with his arms wrapped around a 17-year-old girl at the private residence of a convicted sex offender. That's news. All you need is the photo.
Right.
You could go to air with that, and they had 10 times that. And they didn't put it on their show.
So
that's disgusting.
Have you been following? Because my girlfriend and I went like kind of off Twitter, off the grid this weekend. As much as we wanted a romantic weekend reading about a fucking pedophile who was definitely murdered. Right. Is the left okay? So James O'Keefe, he was the guy who exposed this video, and he, from what I remember, he was the Acorn guy, right? That was him. Okay, great. So I have spent years trashing this guy. He has done straight up some, like, let's call it disingenuous, since we're running out of time, reporting. Because he's the one, do you think that the left is starting to, like, dude, I had people cancel their Patreon because I was like, yo, Epstein's fucking shady. Here he is with Trump. Here he is with Clinton. And literally I had some guy be like, do you have to bring Clinton up? And it's like, fucking, yeah, dude. Yeah, if he's hanging out with a pedophile rapist, 100% I do. Have you noticed, is the left going after this as hard? Because this seems like a very important left and right story. Or because it's O'Keefe, do people like not fucking know what to do?
You got exactly right, Jamie, which is CNN and all these other people which despise James O'Keefe are not doing anything about the story. And ABC is being allowed to sweep all of this under the rug. ABC has issued one statement. They have not addressed the scandal on the air. They got the poor girl who clipped this thing. They got this girl fired from her job at CBS News. This girl did not leak the video to James O'Keefe. O'Keefe himself has said that. The ABC insider leaker even wrote a post about how she didn't do it. I mean, this is these people are going after the ABC employee who clipped this internally, talking about their network's cover-up for a convicted pedophile.
Yeah.
And they will not address this on there. And CNN and NBC News and everybody else, why don't they want to do it, Jamie? Because guess what? They've all got the same stuff in their own Ball.
Well,
Every single one of them has killed the same types of story.
I mean, shit, if CBS was an actual competitor to ABC, you would think that they would, promote this girl. Like, even if she was, like, this is the problem. This happens with whistleblowers, and maybe we'll disagree when it comes to, Snowden or Manning, where it's like, if you're putting people in danger, that's one thing, right? But if you are oftentimes in America, the people who expose the crime get far worse punishment than the people who actually committed the crime. And we forget that there were civilians shot from that helicopter. And we forget that there was a pedophile rapist courting our most powerful people. But instead is like, hey, is the only fucking victim besides all of the girls that were raped going to be some like CBS intern or like whoever the fuck got fired?
Exactly. Why is the president of NBC News who killed the Weinstein story still atop the of NBC News? Not a single NBC exec. Why did CBS cover up for this? Well, CBS's own executive, Les Moonves, was ousted for sexual harassment allegations. ABC News is quashing a story on Jeffrey Epstein. Who's the executive that did that? That guy, I bet you, is making millions of dollars a year. He's going to be sitting pretty. Nothing, or that woman, who knows? I mean, this is, it could be anybody.
Yeah.
These are stories nobody wants to cover, all because it came from James O'Keefe. And it's bullshit. This is that poor girl was on Megyn Kelly's show, literally bawling her eyes out, saying, all I want is a job. She was so excited to be hired as a video editor. She said everybody inside ABC was outraged. Everybody was talking about this video. Anybody could have leaked it. And she is being punished by these two networks because all she did was highlight this clip internally. I mean, this poor girl, can you imagine? It's like you said, the only person who suffers is the low-level employee who just wants to go to work every day. That's an outrage. It's just an outrage.
Do you think there's something different about the Epstein story where, it seems like America just has scandal after scandal, but there's so many things happening, like in the Trump administration or whatever, something so outrageous or silly happens that these stories end up dying. And the Epstein thing seems to be, at least of now, something that is so outrageous that people are trying to stay on it. And I don't know if it's just because it's like fun, like a TV show, because it seems like, he was murdered and the Clintons, whatever. Do you think that this story is going to stick around and maybe something is going to change? Or do you think this is sort of, and I'm not trying to make it about us, but a rallying cry to like, this is why independent media is important, because these news stations are fucking trash.
So this is what it is it checks every box, which is, first of all, he's guilty of one of the most heinous crimes in our society.
Right.
Second of all, he had immense wealth. Third, there was media cover-up. Fourth, there was a criminal justice cover-up. And fifth, it intersects with the most powerful and famous amongst us. So what it really does is the Epstein story shows how you can get away with the most heinous crime that we have decided as a society is the worst amongst us. And yet you can do that if you know the right people and you have the right friends. It validates the immense sense of unfairness within all of us.
Right.
Whenever we see one guy get off or another guy get off, or we see somebody who treats somebody the wrong way and is still back up on the air making $25 million a year, who gets bought off, members of Congress, all of this, we all know this inside. We know that things are wrong. But Epstein, he checks every single box, and it tells us just what you can get away with. And I think that's why it's not going anywhere, is because all of us know that what happened here is such an outrage that if we take the steps to fix what happened there, we can fix an entire system. It is a systemic indictment, I think, of power itself in the United States.
Yeah. Well, look, man, I'm really glad you're saying stuff about it. You guys have been so spot on with everything that makes, I think, the majority of people feel crazy, from like the Tulsi smears to this shit. I'm really glad that, and I feel like, my show and your guys' show, we're hitting it from different angles and we have different ways to go about it. And I hope that sort of it spawns more shows and people see that they don't have to be tribalized and that they can disagree with their side, and that Twitter's basically just fucking Twitter. Because I can tell you, man, I've gotten more shit on Twitter than the majority of people from the left and from the right at different parts of my career. You know how many people I've met outside? None of them.
Yeah.
And if I do, they're fine. And they want to talk, and they're normal, and they apologize. Because, we're not the internet.
There we are. Thanks, Jamie. Really appreciate it, man.
Thank you, brother. Take care.
See you later.